Thank you everyone for attending my session here. I really appreciate everyone coming out to see one client's experience working on Azure PaaS. So my name is Criss Titschinger. I work out of Western and Southern Financial Group, which is out of the United States. It's in Cincinnati, Ohio. Anyone know where Cincinnati is? All right, couple of people, all right. Quick question. Who has a client or who is running Sitecore on Azure PaaS right now? Raise your hand. All right, so a pretty good amount. All right, who is running Sitecore on 8.2? A few? 9.01, or 9.0. Okay, 9.1. So pretty healthy mix, okay. So, just quickly about my company. We were founded in 1888, which I know in Europe is pretty young, but for the United States, that's actually a pretty old company. So we've been in business for 130 years. We are a Fortune 500 company. It's a parent company that sells a group of diversified financial services businesses. So think insurance, investments, and retirement solutions. And so the team I work on is kind of interesting. It's almost like an agency within a large company. So I have a team of developers. I'm kind of, I guess you would call the DevOps guy, but I'm in charge of the Azure implementation, our TFS integrations. And we work hand in hand with our digital marketing team. So it's almost like we're an agency within a big company, which has its pluses for sure. But a quick disclaimer, these are opinions, these are my opinions, which may or may not represent Western Southern. I have to put this in there as a disclaimer. I'm here to talk Sitecore, I'm here to talk Azure, I'm not here to talk investment strategy, right? All right, so we can move on. So high level agenda, I'm coming at this from a client perspective, so I just want to share kind of how we evaluated where to host this, some different resources in Azure that I've seen along the way that have been helpful. Kind of some things that I've found along the way, some tips, watchouts, bumps in the road. Also wanted to go through some upgrade considerations. So I gave this talk about 7 months ago, and we had just been on 8.2. And then we did a whole upgrade to 9.1 or 9.01 in September. So definitely some learnings there. So for hosting, I've seen kind of 3 different ways to go about this. So I know Sitecore has a managed cloud option, and that'll give you a base setup with MongoDB. MongoDB's host, I believe it's still in EBLab. I know MongoDB purchased MLabs, but I think that's still relatively the same. And usually what you get with this is a cap. So cap really means you're allowed to spend X in Azure resources, and if you go over that, there is some penalty for that. There's also, I'm sure some of you guys probably sell your own managed cloud to clients. So this may be good for a client who's not really familiar with Azure, hasn't worked in the cloud before, maybe just dipping their toes in the water, so to speak. Or you could do it yourself. So you could set up your own tenants, your own subscriptions, but then you're in charge of your own Sitecore installation. I know the marketplace has a really good tool to install it. Azure Toolkit works fine too. You're responsible for provisioning your own resources. So you've got to kind of figure out how many web apps you need, how many databases you need, et cetera. Another thing to think about is the security group. So I know at least when you start dealing with some of these tenants that are hosted by like Sitecore Managed Cloud, for example, so they own that tenant, which means they own the security group. So that can get a little tricky as far as setting up users and how much access you need or can get. Also, if you don't have that owner permission, you're not going to be able to see every little thing. So there's some budget considerations you need to watch out for too. But if you're on 8.2, you got to worry about Mongo, which that's not going to be, I mean, you could probably set it up on the marketplace. That's not how we did it. We used MLab, and that seemed to work fine. You could use Mongo on 9.0. We're a Microsoft shop, so we prefer a SQL Server, so that's what we did. So for us, so we've got 7 different business units, right? And they all had their own websites. So part of our Sitecore project was, all right, we've got these individual sites, they're running on TypeScript and all these different things. Why are we doing this? Like, it's just a nightmare to maintain, they're hosted separately, so let's consolidate all of this. So that was our big Sitecore project. We're gonna use Sitecore, we're gonna be in the cloud, and everything's gonna be together. So 8 was fairly simple. So in the beginning, it was a simpler time, right? So we had our content delivery, our content management, processing, reporting, all that stuff. Mongo came in. For logging, I love application insights. I'll get into that a bit more. If you don't want to pay for that, you could use blob storage as well. And as I found out, Sitecore 9 got a little bit more complicated. So we've got all this XConnect stuff going on. We've got all these databases. And that was a lot to take in. And I was kind of thinking, why'd you have to go and make things so complicated? But whatever. So we've got our base set up, right? We figured out, okay, we're on 8.2. We're going to bring that in. We worked with a Sitecore partner, Verndale, to bring us on board, kind of teach us the ropes. Then we took it from there. But how are we going to get this thing up? So we had TFS 2015, which was fine for what it did, but it doesn't support service principals. And so most of you know what a service principal is, yeah? So we couldn't connect that way. We had to use a publishing profile, but that's a terrible idea for security, because especially if you host your own tenant for a client and you have multiple clients, if someone gets that publishing profile, they've got access to all your sites. That's not good. That's why you use a service principal. Okay, so we had to scratch that. Now I'm kind of in a pinch because I'm working with my vendor and I'm trying to bring them on board, and we don't like FTP, so how are we going to get this up? Well, luckily a team had Octopus Deploy that we were able to use, and that was great. That worked just fine. But we really wanted to get back on TFS because that's where we've got our story cards, we've got integration with Git. Really want to get that running. So we eventually upgraded to TFS 2018, and that was great. The support for service principals was there. Needed to write a little bit more PowerShell just to bring all the code and the items together. But that worked out very well for us, and that's what we use today. So this site is kind of our first foray into the cloud as a company. So we weren't going to go full Azure DevOps with this. We still use a lot of on-premises tools, but for us, TFS 2018 works great. So another thing we did is we use the deployment slots on our content delivery server. So we've kind of got our blue-green set up, and when we do a code deployment, we're putting the code on the slot. So one is active, one is cold. And then we do our deployment, so hit each of the servers, and then we need to warm them up. So warm it up, Chris. I'm about to. Anyone remember that? Okay, I'm old. So if multiple instances are running, this may take a little bit longer to heat up, but you can verify your deployment and do your swap when you're ready. And eventually, the inactive environment will go back cold. But one important thing to remember about this is when both are active, they are sharing the same computing resources. So if you're kind of on the fringe just with your content delivery and you're throwing a whole other Sitecore content delivery site on it, they're going to share the same resources. Now, typically when I do deployments, we've got it set up so it's okay, but I can definitely tell when we're doing deployments because I am starting to get some monitors to tell me things might not be going so well, but it hasn't been a problem for us. One thing I will call out though is the application settings are unique per slot. So for one example, if you, for whatever reason, wanted to block your deployment slot from being accessible from outside your network per se, and you had that setting on the slot, and then you do a swap, well now you've just taken down your site. So you got to be careful and make sure they're consistent, or make sure you're changing the settings when you're doing your deployment. So that's code, right? Item deployment. Not here to debate Unicorn or TDS, but we do use Hedgehog TDS for our package deployments. Now, one thing we've seen is the speed of the item deployments on Azure versus on-premises. It is a bit slow on Azure. And something when running locally or on-premises, I didn't really notice, but when we got up into Azure, it was definitely a little bit slower. So now there's a couple different ways you can do databases. You've got your single databases, so kind of like a DTU. which will give you kind of a combination of speed and memory, or you could use a pool. So if one database gets really hot, you can let that go up to a certain point and use more than it would have on a single database. I like the elastic pools better, but I guess it depends how many databases you're running. Maybe on Sitecore 8, you want to think about doing that. On Sitecore 9, definitely, I think elastic pools is the way to go. Again, just my opinion. We also looked at doing get date versus get delta deploys. So I spent a lot of time talking with the Hedgehog guys here today, and I know that they're on 5.8, and they've got some good improvements for the TDS. So I haven't been able to check their get deltas. I think they're a lot they seem to be a lot better now, but for us, get date works fine. So we go back at a certain point of time, so we're not deploying all of the items, just the items that we need, and that seems to work okay. But one thing on Azure for sure that I've found was in the configuration for the package deployer, there's this update configuration files configuration. Definitely want to set that to false. When we had that on true, which is the default setting, we were having items deployments taking up to 30 minutes and sometimes just hanging, and we could never figure out why. We got into this a little bit, setting that to false, huge time save. Haven't had a problem since we changed that. So some other helpful tools that I've found. So Kudu. So every web app that you have is going to have a Kudu site, usually accessible by star.scm.azurewebsites.net. Here you can see all of your environment details. Tons of stuff there. There's a debug console, so if you want to run command line or PowerShell, you're able to do that. If you need to get in and see the Process Explorer, you can do that. So if you want to see what processes are running, maybe there's a CPU that's running hot or some job that's running hot, you can do a pull from there. One watch out though is the timeout is 240 seconds. So if you go longer than that, you may not get that package. So you kind of have to do it, kind of be aware of the time you're running that. Diagnostic dumps and log files are available too. So for our multi-instance content delivery, this is what I've seen. So thinking about auto-scaling versus load-balanced web apps. So with the load-balanced web apps, you can set 1 to X web apps that you want, and they're always running, and that's fine. Auto-scaling seemed to make sense for us because why would we want to pay for a bunch of instances when we can take them up and down? Unfortunately, what we've seen is we want to keep that number steady, and maybe this is because we're not doing it right, or maybe there's something you guys could help me with. If you do, please talk to me after the show. But one thing I've seen is whenever we spun up a new instance, we got a cold start. So I was looking at application settings and looking at my monitoring, and I'm seeing downtime at certain points. I'm like, what's going on? And then I saw, oh, every time a new instance is coming up, that's one of those downtimes. So new instance means cold start for us. So how do we get around that? Is there anything we can do to speed this guy up? So one thing we did do is pre-compiled MVC views. That definitely helped. I've got a lot of, from Microsoft and other companies talking about local cache. I haven't put this into production yet. I just haven't seen the benefit. Maybe others in the audience have. I just haven't seen it make that much of a difference, or at least a measurable difference. Of course, if you've got enough budget, you can increase your app and database resources, but some, like us, may not be able to do that for various reasons. One thing I really do like, though, is finally figured out how to troubleshoot instance-specific settings. So you can do that by finding the Air Affinity cookie. And you can find that in a couple different places. So one is in Kudu, in the environment settings, you can find it there. If you go into resources.azure.com for your subscription, you can dig in a little bit and find it there too. I'll talk a little bit more about the resources part. But this is really cool because once you've got that cookie, you can use a tool to change that cookie value, and then you can hit each instance. So sometimes we'll have a troubling instance for whatever reason, and if I want to go on and try to hit that specific instance, either through Kudu or the site itself, I grab that cookie value, I put it in a tool like edit this cookie, refresh the page, and then I'm on that page for that instance. So that's pretty cool. So web apps, I talked about multiple instances and running, and maybe hot cold starts, and maybe one instance is having an issue. So if I believe you need to be on a standard web app to be able to do this. I'm not sure Basic has it. But you've got availability and performance checks. So the ones I use the most are CPU and memory, especially on the content delivery and content management side. Content delivery obviously is the public side, so I care more about that than maybe the CM, which is our internal users. But still, if our internal users aren't happy with the tool, I'm certainly going to hear about it. So this is how I can check that. Really good CPU and memory reports, and there's even some tips that you can get. So one is like a process is running for a long time, and there'll be a button here. You see the observations and troubleshoot next steps. They'll give you a button to do a kill process there, so you don't have to go anywhere else. It's right in the Azure portal, and that's pretty nice. So this is where I view the performance of individual instances. But one thing to note is Microsoft will spin these up and down. And it's usually one by one. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens enough that I notice it. So I had a ticket with Sitecore support for a while trying to figure this out. If you're doing an IaaS setup or an on-premises setup, you can set up a load balancer, and if you need to block off traffic to a bad instance, you can do that. But I haven't figured out a way to do it in Azure PaaS, at least with the web app load balancing. So when those things start to go up, when those instances go up and down, one of those instances is at a cold start. Well, if you're running 3 instances and one's going down, one's coming up, users have a 1/3 chance of hitting that instance that's loading up. It's not ideal. So for me, I came into work one morning and I go into my diagnostics, and I've got a couple of monitors telling me that there was some momentary downtime. And I was like, what's happening? And then I see this. So you can see here on the chart. So this is a new instance going up, and you can see another line. I think the purple one on the first one, that's when an instance went down and a new one went up. Unfortunately, that happened 2 times that morning. Again, it happens infrequently, but it's enough that I definitely notice it, and that's why when you got that cold start and you're trying to get it back up, you're trying to get it back up as quickly as you can. Application Insights. So who uses Application Insights here? Okay, about half of you. I love it. It's so nice. It's so easy to go through the logs. You can do it by search. You can do it by time. You can drag and drop time. You can see exceptions, traces. I mean, it's all there. It's great. I can't recommend it enough. But one thing I should call out is caps and sampling. So if maybe you're running Azure on multiple environments like we do, maybe 100% sampling in production's okay, but development or test, maybe you don't want that much. So you can set a physical limit on how much you do per day. I think you get 5 gigs for free, and then after that it's like $2.30 a gig. So production may be okay, but lower environments maybe not. And then you can also pick how much of the data you actually want to come through. So if you lower your cap, lower your sampling, you won't pay as much, obviously. But by default, that's not set. So if you just let it go and you're not careful about it, you may find your Application Insights bill is a little bit higher than you thought it would be. So, and I like how they say, well, you're limited to 500 gigabytes, but you could go up to a terabyte if you want. Maybe for some organizations that is a reality. For us, it's most definitely not. We're a pretty small site, so I'm not worried about that. I'm more worried about, all right, am I bringing in too much? Am I not bringing in enough? So some other things. So I'm not here to debate Azure Search versus Solr versus Coveo. What I will say is we did use Azure Search. It's very easy to set up, but I'm sure some are aware of the field limitations. So you are limited to 1,000 in your index, which if you make no changes to the configurations, you're going to hit. And if you rebuild that index, it's probably going to hang. At least it did for us. So what we did is we excluded unnecessary fields or unneeded fields in that content search. So for our site search, we do use Azure Search, but we only have a limited amount of fields. And so that works out for us. As I said, it can hang. But Azure Search is expensive, right? So do I want my developers having a full production Azure Search setup? Probably not. So what we've done to get around that is we have our developers running on free Azure Search. So you get 50 megabytes, which isn't a lot, and we haven't quite hit that yet. I think we're getting close to that, so watch out for that. And you get 3 indexes. So what we've done is we've run the web index out of that free environment. We've all got MSDN credits. It may be a hacky way to do it, but that's worked for us. So Solr, when I was first looking at 901 for our upgrade, I had to figure out like how we would set that up locally. Maybe some of you guys have done this for a long time. I hadn't. So this was kind of news to me. So of course, naturally, setting this up locally, go to the download page, download it, and it doesn't work. I'm like trying to figure out, well, what's going on? Because I downloaded Solr 7, and that didn't work with 9.0. So some of you feel my pain. So okay, I finally figured that out, and that's fine. So I'm listing the Sitecore link here below just to watch out. I definitely look at that table. It's not something I considered when I was first doing it, and it took me longer than I care to admit to figure that out. But we're all good now. All right, so another thing for us was the difference between virtual IPs and static IPs. So in an Azure Web App Service, you're given a lot of virtual IPs, but you don't have one single IP. For some things, this could be a problem. I know for us, we were able to get around it with the CNAME DNS, but I know some teams like to do a single DNS. Well, you can do that if you do an isolated environment through the Azure App Service environment. When I was at Build last year, I was talking to a couple of the guys on the App Service team about this, and they pretty much confirmed, at least as of May 2018, that was the only way to do it. The Azure App Service, the isolated environment, there's a sunk monthly cost before you even start paying for resources. So that can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. So we went with the standard setup with the virtual IPs, and that was fine for us. So just other resources to look out for. So storage, blob storage works great. We did do the Azure SQL audit and threat detection on our databases. It works very well, at least for us, because when trying to access this, if I fat finger a login into that database, our cybersecurity team is going to know about it. If I try to log into that database from home and maybe I didn't set up the firewall correctly, our cybersecurity team is going to know about it. So it works very well. Bandwidth is something to think about. So for us, it's the content management server, and it's bringing down content to put locally. So there is a kind of a cost to bringing all that content down. I wish we were on a CDN. We're not. So we've got a pretty large media library right now. And when we bring all that down, there is a cost to bringing that down. So it's just something that I needed to be mindful of. Kind of goes outside of our standard budget that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think about, but it definitely is there. So you're logging into the portal, and you're going through your web apps, your databases, all of that, but you can't find something. I would suggest you look in resources.azure.com. So if you type that in, log in, you can find your subscriptions, find your web app services that you're running, and you might be able to find something that isn't even in the portal. So for example, we in the Azure community have been screaming for HTTP2 to be available on web apps. I think at one point it was one of the highest requested ticketed items for Azure. And they announced it was available, and I looked in the portal, can't find it. Well, it's because it was here. It was in resources.azure.com. They added that item HTTP 2.0 enabled, so it was false. You set that to true. 2 weeks later, it was in the portal. So maybe that was a fringe case, but I thought that was kind of interesting. So check in resources if you can't find it there. One thing for us, so we're very locked down as far as our firewall and network are set up. So just even doing a deployment, we couldn't do a deployment initially. And then we figured out there was something in our firewall blocking Azure. Okay, we got past that. But now I can't get to my databases. Well, there's something in the firewall that we couldn't get past. Redis, okay, there's something. So you get what I'm saying. Like, so for us, being a client very new to the cloud, we had to work very closely with our infrastructure team on what made sense to open up, what didn't make sense. So definitely some learnings for us there. SSL certificates. So I looked into doing Let's Encrypt. I mean, there's an extension that you can add into the web app, and it works very well. But unfortunately, so our environments, as of now, we've got all of our environments in Azure. So we've got our dev and test in Azure. Those run single web apps. Our staging and production environments run the whole gamut. But they are locked down to our IPs because we don't want them, there's no reason for us to, we're kind of our own client, so there's no reason for us to open that up. So the Let's Encrypt certificates are great until they expire in about 60 to 90 days, and then you've got to do it all over again. Which if you don't have any restrictions, it's fine, it's great. But for me, I had to go back and use a different style of a standard certificate. I think Let's Encrypt certificates are fine. It just, unfortunately for us with our network settings, it was more of a manual process than I wish it were. Azure user roles. So learning for me was, especially being on a partner-managed cloud setup, I could not create a custom role in Azure. We had a unique need for getting some application insights data to our cybersecurity team, but we didn't want them to give write access to that. So there's a monitoring reader role. I might be getting that wrong. Something like a monitoring reader role, but we wanted to customize that a little bit, and then come to find out we couldn't. So at least in our setup, we couldn't set up custom roles, which was a little bit of a bummer, but we were able to get around it. And then there was the whole Sitecore 9 thing. So remember, we're on 8.2. Things were easy, things were simple. And now we're moving to 9. So what a great segue to talk about 9.01. Sorry for the pun. Not sorry. So a lot of resources increase. So take your CM, your CD, your reporting, your processing. Now add all the XConnect stuff. Boom, 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 boom. That adds up. Also adds up if you add that. We don't use the EXM, so we don't have to worry about that. And then there's performance. So definitely in 8.2, fair amount of assemblies out of the box. I got these by doing a get child item just on the standard Sitecore web package deploys. Maybe this is off plus or minus 10 or 20, but I think you'll see where I'm going here. So for 9.01, I saw that, okay, we're increasing this number by about 100, okay? We're not changing any of our topology, okay? Then looking at upgrading to 9.02, adds a little bit more. 9.1's got 400. Okay, it's definitely something to consider if you're on 8.2 and you've got your resources set up and you're budgeted and you want to upgrade. There's going to be a cost to that. Databases. So you lose Mongo. Great. Now you add these. And then one-to-n collection shards. So that's a lot of databases. I mean, you're going from about 4 to, I think in our case, we've got a couple of custom databases. So we're running 15 databases on top of kind of what we had earlier. So again, for me, in our company, elastic pools was definitely the way to go once you started adding on this. Especially for us, we don't use XConnect as much as we probably should, and that's part of my job, to push that a little bit. But a lot of these databases barely run anything. So yes, I could have them at S0s, and they wouldn't cost that much to run, or I could just put them all in this pool and say, web, master, core, you can have as much as you want. These other databases, maybe not so much. So then you're really leveraging the power of Azure. You're not limited to just a single unit. You can spread that out a little bit. I do want to talk about our data migration to Mongo, or from Mongo to SQL Server. So for me, the data migration tool, use it once. And what I found was when I did it, I've got a lot of data. It took a while, but I thought I got everything there. Come to find out, our launch got delayed by another sprint. So okay, I'm going to run it again. Well, when I ran it again, I didn't get all the data that I thought I would. And when you run it, depending on the resources you have, it's going to take a while. It took 9 days for us. So that's what it took. Again, we're kind of on the base topology. So, and remember, so we launched our site in December of 2017, and then we upgraded to 9.01 in September. So there wasn't that much data there. I didn't think that should take a week, but it did. So then I got to figure out, okay, did all the data get there? Thanks to Sitecore support for pointing these two things out. So one is running a top date query against your fact page views in the reporting database. So that'll tell you what date the data has been processed as of. And then if you run a count on the processing pools interaction live processing pool table, that will tell you how many records it still needs to go. So for us, at one point after we did the full migration, that number was around 200,000, which is a lot. So then you need resources to bring all that in, and I'll get to that in a bit. Another thing that we had to look for was that, so let's see, in the marketing XDB, Sitecore Analytics Processing Aggregation Services configuration, there's a maximum batch size within that core helper. So you can increase that a little bit. I think by default it's like 36. You can set that a little higher, but you got to watch out. Depending on your topology, you may time out if you set it too high. So you've got to, at least for me, I had to find that right value of what got us the most data without timing out. So again, if I could go back and do it all over again, definitely would have increased my processing web app and my reporting database. They were very hot during that whole time. Because otherwise, data is going to take a long time to fully process. So again, we're going from Mongo to SQL Server. And it's a good thing we didn't need this data right away because it took multiple months to get everything processed. Again, I was restricted on my budget. I couldn't just up the databases, couldn't increase the web app. So my job was kind of setting expectations with our product owner, saying, okay, based on these trends, this is when I think the data will be here. He didn't like my answer, but it was what it was, and it's there now. So we're full. Thankfully, we're fully there. And if you're not getting any data at all, make sure to check that remote client configuration, especially if you change DNS. If you're on Azure, if you're changing things to more of a friendly URL than the Azure websites.net URL, you definitely want to check that, because if you're not getting data through, at least one example I saw, that was the reason. So for us, when we upgraded, we looked at a couple different methods. One was through keeping our existing resources and upgrading the package, or going through and creating new resources and doing new NuGet package and source control. The latter worked better for us, because when we tried to do the upgrade package, we ran into hundreds of broken changes, and it honestly wasn't worth trying to go through and fix it. So for us, that was a more reliable method. again, I'm on 901, so I've messed around a little bit with 902 and 9.1, but I'm not quite there yet. I'm aware of the Upgrade Center. It's something I definitely want to try when we go either to 902 or 9.1, but I just haven't tried it yet, so unfortunately I can't speak to that yet. So Azure Topology. So Sitecore has published kind of what they think is the right topology for your resources. I think 8.2 is serviceable. I think 9.0 is too low, especially when you start talking about some of that processing pains that we ran into. I really think you need to be on premium app services, at least for us, because there's not really a difference that I've seen between basic and standard other than you get the deployment slots, you get more backups with the standards, and that's fine, but the Azure compute units are the same. So to really get that extra power, you need the premium services, but of course that costs money. Databases, like I said, Elastic Pool is definitely for 9.0 the way to go for us. And I'll say this, so if you do run a tenant for your client, and depending on your contracts, and let's say your client wants to upgrade for a reason, just be transparent with them because 9.0 is going to cost more than 8.2. And that's, I mean, that's why I showed that example of kind of all the web apps we had to create. I mean, that's the reality. So please, work with your clients to amend their contracts. Work with them. I mean, for us, the push to 9.0 was forms. That was the big thing. So we didn't have to go through web forms for marketers, thank goodness. But we do custom forms now, and they're great. But that was a big push for us, and it's worked fine. But it came with the added cost of per month doing all that. So that wraps up my talk. I'll take questions if you got them. I'm on the Slack channel. I am on Twitter if you want to get a hold of me, but mostly I talk about soccer and golf, sometimes about Sitecore. So, you know, go Columbus Crew, go Arsenal. If you're a Tottenham fan, I'm sorry. I know I'm in the city, so that I may have swayed the audience there. But again, coming from the United States, my first time at SUGCON. I've been at Symposium before, but I love what comes out of this conference. I'm so happy that the organizers accepted my talk. I hope you got something out of it. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. Yeah, one there, one over there, maybe, one there.
Hi.
Hi.
So for one of our clients, we are running Sitecore 8.2 on infrastructure as a service in Azure. So we are looking for upgrading to Sitecore 9, and what would you recommend first, moving with 8.2 to PaaS, or do it in one go?
Good question. So I think you can do it in one go, but I would say definitely 9.01 over 9 initial, because what I found was with 9 initial, there were just so many changes that I had to make going from 8.2 to 9 initial that I didn't have to make when we went from 9.0 to 9.1. So I would say one go, 9.01. Maybe 9.02 now. 9.02 wasn't available when we did the upgrade. If it were, I probably would have went to that. But yeah, that's what I would say there. Yes.
Hello. Can you share, if it's allowed, the notes pretty much in the pods, because I think it's quite helpful, because a lot of us right now are facing the same journey ahead.
That is good to know. I'm glad I'm not alone in this journey.
This was very informative. So
thank you. Yeah, I'll get with the organizers. Maybe I'll take Avril Lavigne out of that deck, but I'll clean it up a little bit, and yeah, I'll publish it out.
And the second mini question.
Yes.
Why did you go with MLabs? Was it really because of Microsoft, or was it a specific?
It was because that was what was provided to us.
Okay.
So if I had my way, I probably would have done that differently. Probably would have went Mongo Atlas, but MLab was kind of what we got. So yeah, it wasn't really a strategic decision. It was kind of like, we're going to give you Sitecore, we're going to give you Azure, and we're going to give you MLab with it. Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi. Short question.
See. Okay, gotcha.
We have installed Sitecore 901 in Azure, and we have experienced same performance issues. For example, we had missing tables in databases.
Yeah.
And therefore we had lots of items in the database, like something around about 600,000.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not quite. I mean, we've got a lot of items in there, but yeah, nothing like
we
that.
had to clear them all.
Oh my goodness.
It took us around about 2 hours to execute the query. We had to reduce the timeout, or we had to execute it from our Visual Studio because there is no timeout for SQL queries.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe another question. Have you used App Gateway, and have you experienced some issues with resolving, with hostname resolving?
With what? Sorry?
With App Gateway.
No experience there.
Okay, you're a happy one.
Sorry. Got one here, one there, one there. Let's see, I've got 5 minutes still, so keep them coming.
Hi, have you experienced any problems with Azure Search? Because we get some strange errors that it hangs, or
So it's funny you say that, because I did run into an issue just last week where we did a publish, or content authors did a publish, and the previous version came out of the web database as I would expect, but the index didn't change. And I can't replicate that issue for the life of me.
we experienced complete hangs of the website?
Complete hangs of the website? No. But I will say when we changed that configuration to only pick the fields that we want to do, it definitely helped. So I would say keep that as low as you can.
Thanks.
We're having the same problems you are with the restarts and that aspect of web apps.
Yeah.
The flaw, I feel like, is that you don't have that control at the load balancer level. So we have got support talking to Microsoft support, and hopefully something will come out of that. So.
Yeah, I should probably write a blog post about that, because I did the same thing a few months ago. I reached out to Sitecore support and I showed them, kind of the same graphs I did here. Like, hey, look at these spikes. I mean, that's downtime.
Yeah.
That's production downtime. That's not good. Like, we've got to figure that out. So I should share some. I'm sure. Well, let me talk to Sitecore support, make sure like what's proprietary, what's not. But yeah, I mean, for sure, you're not the only one who's trying to work with Microsoft to get that figured out. Yeah. I don't think that's bad, right?
Yeah.
So.
No, I think my customer is in here as well, but
No pressure, right?
yeah, we experienced the same thing. I think it was last week again, and we actually got a confirmation from Microsoft that it was on them. So basically, we saw the same thing with web apps going up and down throughout the day.
Okay,
And
great.
it was on them. We got it from support.
All right. So I guess as of now, no resolution, or it is what it is.
They said they fixed it.
Okay. I'm gonna smile and nod at that one. Next.
Okay, last question.
Last question?
Yep.
Okay.
Regarding the cold starts, what you can do is you need to set up application initialization in your web config
Okay.
to avoid the cold start, so it will warm up before the new instance is added to the pool. But when you do that, you also need to make sure that HTTPS redirection is skipped for those requests.
Oh, okay.
And if you do that, then you won't have those cold starts anymore.
Okay, great. Thank
And
you.
well, another thing to help startup time
Yes.
is to add the Roslyn compiler in your deployment in your bin folder. That will double the startup, half the startup time.
Oh, wow.
It helps a lot. It
Okay.
helps very much. And also standard and P2.
Yeah, keep going. I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
An S2 server is the same price as a P2 V1, but it has the same specs, but it runs on SD drives, which makes also the site a lot faster.
Yeah.
So that definitely helps.
Okay.
And all those other services, you can put them together in one application service plan if they don't consume much to reduce your cost.
Yeah.
Because the cost is on your app service plan and not on your app itself.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Good thought. Thank you. All right.
Great. Thanks
Yep.
very much.
Thanks, everyone.